right, 3 minutes past the hour. First of all, thank you everybody for joining today. It should be a great session. I'm going to be joined by my friend Chris Cassano, and we're going to talk a bit about metadata and SaaS apps and global availability and lots of different challenges that many organizations face when they want to deploy their application as a service, and how a consistent system of record might actually help with that and kind of simplify things. And so I hope people here have that problem. If not, there's going to be a whole bunch of other stuff that's pretty valuable here in terms of data partitioning and some of these things when you start to go cross regions with tables and whatnot. So it should be a great session. But first of all, thank you for joining. And just a quick housekeeping. Today's session is going to be, I'm going to consider it about an intermediate. We're going to talk a little bit technical about some of the stuff in terms of how you partition a table, how you move things around. We've got a couple of topics that we're going to cover, but we would love questions and comments from you all. If you're on the Zoom, great. Please do add it right into the QA or the chat. I will definitely be monitoring that along the way. If you're on YouTube, dump it into the comments, or LinkedIn, dump it into the comments. And my friends here at the company will help us get those questions in front of Chris and I. So, and then before we start, as always, the recording will be available a little bit later today, and it's almost immediate, because we're actually streaming to YouTube, so these things are out there pretty quickly, and on the channel. So if you want to share or see something you need to have me slow down, whatever that is, please by all means do. So I'm going to come on video. So I'm going to ask my friend Chris to join me here. Hello, Chris Cassano. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Jimmy Walker. How are you?
I'm good, buddy. Ooh, I'm Jimmy today. I like it. Getting really informal with me. So thank you for joining, Chris. Y'all, Chris is our director of sales engineering. And, I know, sales is sometimes one of these things. Sales engineers are the people who make stuff happen. I'm honored to have Chris on the phone because he's in the weeds, making this stuff happen with companies and helping make them successful. So Chris, I
wouldn't say it's the weeds. It's more like the flowers.
In the flowers, yeah. How long have you been with Cockroach Labs, Chris? Uh-oh. Is that me or is that Chris losing bandwidth here?
Whole time. Oh, no. Is that happening again?
Yeah. Now? Yeah, you're good, buddy. You're good.
Okay.
How long have you been with Cockroach Labs, Chris?
I'd say about 2.5 years now.
Yeah. And then across all of our customers, how many customers, and people that working with Cockroach DB are using the database in some form or fashion for what we're going to talk about today in terms of like the metadata and like the things that kind of feed into the real problems that people are solving? Uh-oh.
Yeah, I mean, I would say metadata use cases are probably 65 to 70% of our use cases. A lot of other ones are around things we do are around metadata, and metadata is a lot of different forms. So I think it's gonna be a great discussion today because it's been top of mind. Well,
I think I don't know if that's me or you that's bugging out a little bit, Chris. Is the stream clean for you, for me, or is it? Yeah, I think your internet's a little bit off. So I'm gonna start talking and get into this stuff. I don't know if you want to reset or not, but okay. You know me, I'm gonna do the first couple slides. All right.
Okay, go for it. Sorry if I'm not wired in, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on here.
And for anybody internally, I was going to ask Chris's sign. So I guess we don't talk about that today. So, okay, so metadata and what is metadata? Being in the kind of data space for a long time, I originally started my career thinking about system of record and, the things that we can model, orders and customers and addresses and these sort of things. When I think about metadata, it too is structured. Sometimes it's semi-structured, but it's really kind of, I think of like three things when I think of metadata. Number one, the data that's created by the thing being the app, right? Or it could be, maybe it's a robot creating this metadata. Maybe it's a satellite up in space delivering, ISP service to the countries, lots of different things. And it's kind of like, what is the data that's coming off servo motors and these sort of things, but just kind of the exhaust that's coming out in any of our applications, log files, these, lots of different things. And then the data that runs the thing. So the data that the application needs to actually perform. And then there's data that it uses to deliver what it wants to do. And I think of all those things as metadata. Now, the last one's a little bit different than system of record. And we'll come back to that, but it's kind of a system of record in the context of, say, what we're going to talk about today, and that's like how we actually deploy an app as a service, because the app is the app, but then there's this whole other service application that kind of fuels these things. So, but we'll talk about all these things, but just kind of a quick, run down what is metadata when we're talking about that. It's created, it runs, and it's used by the thing, if you will. When I think about metadata, getting a little bit more kind of in detail, I think there's two types, right? There's this time-based and kind of forensics data that we use. And I think, traditionally, that's what we think about in metadata in lots of different circles. I always think about the exhaust data that's coming over our applications, the log files, the machine data. A lot of this stuff that, my friends over at Splunk have used for a long time to run analysis, or stuff that you're streaming into, say, Timescale or some other time series database, maybe, using Prometheus and Grafana to actually investigate and look at those sort of things. And I think, a lot of that kind of time-based forensics type stuff, that's one side of the metadata that we see kind of coming out of apps, right? It's data about data, right? And that's basically what's going on. There's this whole other category of kind of metadata, and that's like this, the usage and the real-time statistics of what's happening inside an application itself. It's the user data that feeds into things. Maybe it's credentials that you're using from within an application to log into, remote systems, right? And you're doing an RPC or something like that, right? It's the usage data of what's going on, the billing data, all different types, interactions, how you're interacting with, maybe it's in gaming, it's how one player is interacting with another player and everything that's coming off of that. That to me is also usage, and it's metadata, right? And I think there's lots of different data that isn't kind of this kind of transactional system of record, but also very important. I think another great one in the gaming thing is like your presence. You're walking around in a dungeon and you're shooting somebody, and you come out of the game for a second, you come back in. Well, all of that data, your presence of where you were in that game and how you actually come back, and are you right back to where you began or where you left the game? That to me is it's metadata about your experience. And so those are the kinds of things from a metadata point of view that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk less about this time-based kind of forensics, the old world of like investigating and kind of post-event kind of thing. And let's talk about real-time stuff. Real-time, like these things that are kind of like part of the capabilities and the functions that are driving our applications today. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, just to give a sense of that. And Chris, just before I go on, just to level set, anything you want to add there? I know we're going to talk about each of these.
No, I think you're spot on. I'm excited to get into it, and it looks like my internet connection is better, so hopefully you can hear me.
All right, you are much better. So, but there's lots of different. I mean, if I think about some of that data and what I was talking about, like the second half of that slide, Chris. I mean, these are some of the things that we're seeing already, right? Like, I mean, all of these are metadata, correct?
Yeah, these are all kind of use cases I've run into in the past 2.5 years here, and some of them, occurred multiple times. Like if you go all the way down, like the identity management service. I mean, this is bread and butter for us. We do these all the time, so it's cool to see that these use cases kind of matriculate into Cockroach, and there's a lot of unique things that we can do with the database to make these these services or these applications really really fast, really sprite, really, modern. So yeah. Happy to really get it, into the thick of this.
And we'll talk about sort of more discrete kind of like stuff around these kind of towards the end of the presentation. We'll go through a couple of customer stories. I think I was on a webinar with our friends at Launch Darkly. The way Launch Darkly is using us to kind of fuel how they do feature flags. If you're a developer and Launch Darkly, I mean, if you think about feature flags and how do you, within each of the instances of your service, provision what you want to do with each one of them, and based on each user that's used. So there's some use cases there. We'll talk a little bit about more explicitly some of the customers are doing some of that stuff. But yeah, we up and down the board. I think metadata is our most widely used case. I mean, I really think it breaks down into two sides, Chris. It's like 40% system of record. 60%, it's all this metadata stuff, and I think it gets really interesting.
I agree. I think that breakdown seems right to me.
Cool. So if I look at this and I look at this was Chris's slide that he sent me last night. There was one word that kept coming up over and over again, and it was this word, service. And I think this concept of service is really what's changed over the last couple of years, and I think that's what's really driving this kind of other side of this metadata world. If you think about some of the things we talk about, usage and billing or in-presence experience, well, that would have been stored kind of locally in your instance of the app and just used when you download it every once in a while, right? So this concept is like, how do you centrally collect all this stuff across the entire, wherever your customer may be? That's what we're going to talk about here. And that's when we start to think about, software as a service and what are the challenges that you have from a data point of view. That's really what the rest of this presentation is going to be all about. So let's just go back in time a little bit. And I don't know, this is the way that I used to build applications. I don't know, I'm old, I'm the old way, we built the application, sat there, coded away. I released it. In fact, we had to release it on, oh God, it was Windows and Mac and like OS X and like OS 2. I remember like we had build files for whatever. You don't do this anymore, right? You used to, build it, release it. Somebody would go to the store and buy it, or go to, CD warehouse, or what was CDN? Remember those resellers, Chris? Oh my God.
Yeah, CDW or
CDW and Ingram Micro and Trend and all. Remember all that craziness? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So they would go buy the software for them. They would download it or get a CD, install it, have this CRC check fail after 17 CDs, which always was fun, as you install it on a server, and then you would use that software. That's basically kind of how things used to be.
You're not dating yourself at all, Jim.
What, dude? These things used to happen.
I know. This is real. I know. This is reality. You're very wise.
15 and it would fail, right? Like, oh God. Oh joy, right? But this is, I mean, even come on, y'all. I mean, even as you downloaded software over the last 3 years, I mean, we're still doing this, right? We download software. I downloaded Photoshop here to my laptop. It's running locally. I'm connected via cloud for all my backend files and stuff, but man, that stuff's still running. And this is definitely still the way a lot of things work, and the customers still kind of consume this way. There's a lot of challenges here though, right? How do I kind of issue new releases? How do I make sure people are up to date with the most recent stuff? I could bother them with email or in-product experience if it's connected, but I can't kind of force anything on them. What if there's an emergency fix, that sort of thing, right? I have very limited insight into usage. In fact, a lot of customers don't like it when apps phone home with information, right? Like that's kind of an invasion of privacy, if you will, sometimes, right? I think people are much more amenable to that when things are a service. Troubleshooting becomes difficult. What am I gonna like tell it into their machine and check things out? Like, and that's always been a challenge as people run their own software, and you as the ISV is kind of, challenged to actually deal with these things. I have no control over reuse. I don't know. Here, Chris, here's the CD and the key. I wrote it on the CD itself, and I think it's kind of difficult to control how people are actually, how many instances of stuff they're doing. I know there's ways to do this with license keys and other stuff, but there's always kind of, an open for fraud in those sort of cases, unless you have complete control over the software itself. And there's really kind of very limited ability to do any sort of like these kind of advanced billing methods. And I think the way that people want to consume software is consumption-based. I only want to pay for what I can, right? And then basically, I think there's certain things that are enabled when things are hosted as a service. When you're limited to a single machine with a connection that may or may not work, or whatever that is, I think there's some capabilities and some features that might be opened up by a new way. Do I have? Oh yeah. So in the new way, basically what we do, and this is kind of the modern way that I think most organizations are thinking about deploying apps. They may not be doing this yet. I think we're all coming to terms with this, right? And of course, we build the application. We publish it to the cloud using, Jenkins or some CI/CD workflow. This is all repeatable. There's this whole kind of repository that's feeding into it. This whole automation of the software supply chain to deploy on the cloud. Maybe you're, provisioning with, HashiCorp Terraform of the service, and there's this publishing to the cloud is a very, very complex part of this, but extremely efficient. Ultimately, customers are typically now subscribing to software. They aren't buying a service. You're going to subscribe. It's typically an annual subscription. And then we as the company or the developer, we need to provision that instance for that particular customer. So we've provisioned this service to multiple different customers, and we're running it for them on the cloud, right? We're providing the service, making sure it's available, this sort of thing. That's typically how people are doing it. There's a lot of problems here. I think the cloud addresses a lot of this, actually all the challenges that we saw in the old way, but it also provides a lot of value as well, right? It gives us insight into real-time usage, exactly what's going on with each of our customers. We Cockroach DB, we are deployed as a service as Cockroach DB dedicated. And we have a fairly good understanding of like how much usage is going on within, our serverless clusters. It's great. We don't know exactly what you're doing, but we know that things are being used because, well, it's taking up compute cycles, right? That sort of stuff. we have better control over upgrades and releases and maybe feature flagging, like my friends at Launch Darkly do, and getting new features into the hands of maybe a handful of users at a time, right? This is a whole new way of product development and the way that we deploy things. And then this direct interaction with the customer is just really, really important. The things that kind of, when you can connect the two sides and there's no kind of like distant hardware in the middle, like you can have a much more direct experience and much better experience with customers. So the new way does present a lot of new value, but it presents a lot of new challenges. I think ultimately you are relied upon to provide the ultimate customer experience. And I think, with modern services, people don't want downtime. Like, again, I hate to pick on gaming, but think about gaming. Like if a game goes down and it's out for 10 minutes or even a minute or 3, not many people are going to continue playing that game. Maybe they just go to another game and now they're hooked on that game for a while, right? And so like your expectations have been elevated because these services are on and always available. And that's, I think, what people are really, really kind of, concerned about. You're also now in control of the data that's in that application. And so when you start to think about privacy and security, and the control over you have in terms of the app data for each of the customers, you are now on the hook to make sure that doesn't get corrupted or somehow leaked. And so that's another big challenge, right? When it was on their own server, they had control of their server in the old way. And I think there was a different concern, right? We need to track usage and control who's actually dealing with these things. How much are they using the software? Can I now have this kind of consumption-based billing that people want with services? And then I think the number 5 here to me is extremely difficult. And we learned this ourselves here at Cockroach Database or Cockroach Labs. Deploying Cockroach on, say, AWS versus GCP. Oh man, it's a different, these are basic, it might as well be like Mars and Venus. I don't know, man. Like they're completely different environments. And so when you have to provision these things across different cloud providers, it is complex. It is complex. And by the way, if you're provisioning in one cloud for one customer and another for a wholly other, how do you have any sense of like who's using what across all of those things, right? Well, ultimately, I think really what it comes down to, and gosh, oh man, did we ever learn this ourselves? Building a database is hard, but building something as a service is also like equal. Ask Lakshmi and team how hard that was, right? But we're there, and we learned a whole lot along the way. And a lot of what's informed me, honestly, in this presentation was kind of our own personal experience. But I think, Chris, you're seeing it with our customers, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like our managed service that we've kind of dog fooded ourselves, right? It's a metadata type of application service that we provide. We learned a lot from it. We put some of those things into the database, and now our customers are kind of doing the same thing, right? They want to be able to create these new service offerings, whether it's for data access, data warehousing, identity management, whatever it might be, authorization. But the design patterns are kind of the same, and the usage of Cockroach is really unique in that regard, because there's a lot of nifty things that we can do with the way we can move metadata around in the cluster itself and bring that metadata closer to the user so that the user experience is really snappy.
That's right. And I think that leads right into kind of what we're talking about. I mean, like having one single global consistent database across all of those different services, by the way, in all the regions in which that service needs to be deployed, because you may have a customer in Asia, they need low latency access to that data, or you may have people in different cloud providers. Like having one single system of record for this metadata layer, it's a big deal, right? And so, I mean, this is kind of the stuff that you're seeing is kind of the 5 key areas, right, Chris? And I'll let you go. I think we're going to talk about each of these a little bit more technically, right?
Oh yeah, we can get into all this stuff. I mean, the first 2 are our bread and butter right here, right? A lot that goes to the name of Cockroach DB, right? Always, hard to kill, very resilient. That's what the database provides. So that's what customers are always looking at, right? When they're providing a service or an application, they want 4 nines, 5 nines of availability. So with Cockroach, you get that. You get an always-on experience. A node goes down, the database can keep ticking along. You lose an entire region, the database can keep ticking along. Even when you have to do, an upgrade of the database, a major upgrade or maintenance, again, the database keeps ticking along. So these are things that not just app developers, but a lot of DBAs or operational teams love, because it's pretty much hands off.
That's right.
Even when a node goes down or a region goes down, you don't have this giant failover, fail back process happening in the background that you have to build or operate. it's just the database handles it for you, which is really magical, I would say.
Yeah, it's funny. Megan Goldman and I have had longer conversations about. Megan is one of the product marketers here at Cockroach Labs, and we feel like Cockroach is the database that does the work that you don't want to do, which is right. Like, I don't want to scale. I don't want to like manage an active passive system. I don't want to deal with failover. I don't want to deal with I don't want the application, like, honestly, I don't want the application layer to deal with like data locality, right? I think that it's all those things, but I just want it to be SQL.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
So
that kind of goes to your last point, the last point on the slide here, Jim. App developers love that we're SQL based and that we speak Postgres.
That's right.
Use the Postgres drivers today to connect to Cockroach, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
So another great experience for app developers.
Yeah, interesting, Chris. I've been playing around a lot with Cockroach DB serverless. I've been testing it with all of these like node code platforms. I'm a marketer, dude. I don't have patience to code in Python and Go or whatever. I gave that up like 20 years ago, dude. So these no code platforms.
Yeah, you just want to be able to put those apps on a CD, don't you?
Right, exactly. Oh my God, please. No, I deploy them on my phone, dude. Come on, man. It's App Store craziness. I'm modern. But like, look at those no code platforms, they all work. I'm basically using the Postgres drivers. There's no like special Cockroach DB driver like you have with other database. It's just basically Postgres, but better. And I think these things just work. And I think that's one of those things. I like referential integrity, by the way. I enjoy joins. I like materialized views. I think normalization of data, that sort of stuff gets really important. So, yeah. All right. So let's drill into each of these, Chris. I know you had like a little bit more detail on kind of what these things are, right?
Yeah. The two multi-region bullets on the last slide, I'm really going to drill into those. So this is something that definitely is really unique to Cockroach. We give you a lot of schema flexibility when you start using, Cockroach in a multi-region setting. So basically what that means is you're taking a database and spanning that database across multiple data centers or multiple regions. And there's a lot of schema flexibility there as far as where you want data to land, where you want data to reside, and how to make, reads really fast, how to make writes fast. You have a lot of choice, I guess, as far as how you want to, service your application. I'm going to get into the details of how you might want to do that with, metadata.
I think it's like you got a lot of levers, a lot of dials to turn. You're basically the wizard in the background making it all happen, right? And so
yeah, exactly.
One single logical database across these regions, pretty simple to deploy that.
Exactly, and I'm going to try to give you the playbook, right? If you're thinking about, building an app or a service, and metadata is important too, I'm going to give you a couple of tidbits of what to think about along the way. Cool. So one really cool concept with Cockroach is that, the tug of war that you can always balance is performance versus survivability. So you can choose this. You can choose how you want to survive through failure. So one of the things that you can do is change that failure scenario. You might want to be able to survive a regional failure, or you might want to just be able to survive through an AZ failure. You can choose what's more important to you. Obviously, if you survive a regional failure, there's greater, you're trying to mitigate a large outage, which is perfectly fine. So based on how you set up your survival goal, the database will move the data around for you, right? So if you're just doing, an AZ failure, you just want to be able to survive an AZ failure, it will move most of that data into a primary region. But if you want to be able to survive a regional failure, it will move that data across the cluster a little more generously. So just know that concept as far as how Cockroach works. If we get into, we can move forward.
I'm sorry, Chris. I have like itchy trigger finger, and I was worried about what was happening in the other room over there.
Oh,
so, yeah. It's okay, buddy. I like it.
My little guy.
Yeah, it's okay.
When I talk to him about work, this is how he reacts. He's good. I think he's just hungry, looking for lunch. Let me just make sure my door's closed. I think it is.
This is the I'm going to miss this one day, the pandemic, and the working from home.
Yeah. Sorry about that, everybody, but he's good. I think he's just hungry for lunch. All right. So if we talk about the next pieces of metadata, so there's basically three types of things that you can do with the schema in Cockroach, or three types of tables that you can utilize. So one of them are global tables. And this is great because you can basically get this data replicated across the cluster in a pretty easy fashion. So you would use global tables typically for things that are really static, data that's static. There might be lookup tables or data that's, referential, or, Jim, you mentioned before, having referential integrity or foreign keys. These are great for those types of
discount codes.
Yeah,
right? I want that everywhere, right? Like in my system, my POS. I want discount codes to be everywhere and fast.
Yeah, and they might not change that often, right? So that global tables are great for that. They're great for things that you got to have a lot of reads and
slow changing, low latency, accessed by everybody.
Right. You want fast access everywhere, but it doesn't change that often. And then when you do have to do a write, there's a little bit of a penalty you're faced with doing a write, because you're basically, the way our global tables work, you're writing into the future, right? We're going to give you a consistent read across the entire database, but we're going to write into the future. So there's a little bit of a latency with the writes, but it's why you would choose this use case when you don't have a lot of writes happening and on the static data or referential data.
And then you're going to be guaranteed the data is correct in every region, right? Like, I mean, that's the whole key here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have something in Cockroach called a max offset setting. It's basically a window of uncertainty time that is always going to be in the right for a global table. So you'll take that penalty up front, and then the round trip it takes to get the write into the replicas. So again, it's a little bit of a penalty, but it's worthwhile if you don't have a lot of writes for this type of data.
So Chris, if I'm just doing like a handful of writes, and say I'm global and I'm truly running in, say, Asia, the US, Europe, what are we talking about? Are we talking about like a half a second? Are we talking about 10 seconds?
I would say generally, if in a global use case like this, you're going to see anywhere from like a half second to a second, probably, on a pretty big cluster, or a pretty globally sized cluster. But again, if it's static or referential data, it shouldn't be a big issue.
That's right.
Now, there's other things where you want low latency, right? You want to be able to have really fast writes, and we can localize those into this local region. And I'm going to show you how we do that as well. So
real quickly as background, before we go any further, somebody was asking in the YouTube channel, I'm not sure who it was, but they were asking, how do you set the regions for the nodes in Cockroach, Chris?
Oh, great.
It's good background. I think it's like it's kind of baseline. It's kind of how this all works, right?
Yeah. So I jumped way ahead. So I appreciate reeling me back in. So at the time you set up a cluster, you can specify the regions and availability zones a node resides on. If you're using our dedicated service, it's all done for you. You don't have to think about it. But if you're starting a node in any server, you can give it basically what we call locality information. What region is it in? What AZ is it in? And so forth. From there, that's going to be cluster wide. You can then create databases on the cluster, and you can specify what region you want that database to be in, and what regions you want that database to use. It can use one region, it can use 3 regions, it can use 5. You can choose based on how big your cluster is and how many regions it spans. Inside that database, you can have tables that go to that primary region, or you can have tables go into other regions of that database. So it gets really granular. Like, you have regions at a cluster level. You can use them at a database level. You can choose them at a table level. And in some cases, you can even choose them at a row level as to where you want data to reside. So you have ultimate flexibility as to where you want data to be, where to go, how to position it. And as I get into like the next 2 use cases, you're going to see how this works.
Yeah, and it's pretty awesome, the granularity and the control. Once you get it, it's kind of hard to unsee one of these things. You know what I mean? Like once you get it on a table by table basis, I don't want to confuse anybody, but a little foreshadowing, wait until super regions come out, which is a wholly other thing. But that's maybe there's a super region called Europe, and then there's a region called Germany, and there's a region called the UK. And like, we're adding even more levels to this. And it's the right levels of complexity, because each table has its own requirements, right, Chris? I mean, that's what we're talking about. I mean, here it's global tables. I just need it in every region really fast, but we're going to talk a little bit more how to getting more granular, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes down to what your service needs to do, or your app needs to do, right?
That's right.
Look at those requirements, and then you can figure out what's the right schema to set up for this particular service, right? So let's move to regional tables. And these are the default setting within our multi-region setup. So anytime you go and create a table in a multi-region setup, it's going to be tagged as a regional table. So what this means is that you pick a primary region for where you want this table to be. Doesn't mean it always has to be in the primary region. You can always say, hey, the main locality for this is in region 3 or region 1. You can pick and choose. If you don't choose, it's just going to choose what the primary region of the database is. All right, so it's kind of inherited from the top. So these are great tables if you have a service or something that's always going to run in a particular region, right? So an example would be, I'm working with one customer right now that they have a customer fulfillment messaging service. So as a customer places an order and they want a message with the delivery person, all of that messaging is actually coming through a third-party vendor and is going into one region, right? So there's no need for this to be multi-regional. They really want to concentrate all those messages going to a primary region. So you can do, if you have a service like that that's running, or you have a third-party, stream of data, or even if you have other things that you might just want to only run in a primary region, this is it's great to choose regional tables for that type of activity.
Yeah, I think of things like Starburst is a customer of ours, and Starburst is using us in this way. So if anybody's here kind of familiar, we're going to talk a little bit about them at the end too. I think Starburst is a great customer of ours, Chris. Like, they're so cool. Like, also a data company, totally get it. Like Justin, I know him from the Adapt days, dude. I think I think they're doing great stuff. But you think about it like that application. Okay, well, I'm going to have this distributed services in regions that, this database that I'm interacting with is in a particular region. Well, I'm going to have all the credentials for that database in that region. I don't need them everywhere, just in that one region where I'm making that connection. So it's super uber fast, right? And so we'll talk a little bit more about Starburst and some of the data that they're doing, but that's a good example. Like, it's credentials for systems that they're interacting with. If you guys know what Starburst is, so it's another good example.
Yeah, and so there's a good amount of flexibility here too, right? If you know that that service is always going to run in a primary region, and you're okay with AZ failure, right? You don't care about regional failure. Then this is showing you here. We have 3 voting replicas, right, within the picture. You can move that third replica into region 1, right? Then your writes are going to be super fast, right? Because all the writes are local. But if you want to do a regional failure, then yeah, we have to kind of get the replicas out into other regions. But you have that flexibility of choosing, hey, how safe do I want to be, or how fast do I want to be?
That's right.
It's up to you.
Yeah, I always think about this paradigm shift into a distributed database really comes down to one thing. We used to think about the logical model. Today, we have to think about the physical model. And the physical model requires us to think through survivability or speed. And it's really those two things. I think that's and it's really at the table and the row level for all those things. So
yeah. Cool. So that's why it was always good to look at your service requirements, right? What is what's your RPO, RTO? What's the service? What's the latency that you can incur? What's the read-write ratio? We'll look at all those things, and then we can figure out, hey, what tables make sense within your application.
And that's right, Chris. And it's not just the database. I think some solutions do this at the database level, which is interesting. Doing at the table level is it opens up. I think it opens up actually new capabilities.
Yeah, well, it opens up a ton of doors, because it used to be that all those requirements were app specific. It was the entire app, right? Now you can break them down into smaller services, like what's the resiliency of this service? What's the resiliency of that service? What performance this need versus that one? Right. So it's giving you a ton of flexibility as far as how you want to deploy your apps.
Right. Discount codes are everywhere, but Chris Cassano's data in the customer table is actually local to US East.
Yeah.
Because I want fast interaction, all your copies. So if you all know what distributed consensus is, we don't synchronize data in Cockroach. We write consensus, and that's actually a really big difference between, traditionally the way that we got scale or we got resilience was through some sort of sync or async communication, whereas distributed consensus is really kind of the core of distributed systems and from a database point of view. So it's a big deal. So
yeah,
cool, Chris. Cool. Anything else here?
I think we're only other thing I mentioned, I don't have it kind of highlighted in the slide, but even if you wanted to read data, let's just say you had a user that wanted to read the data locally in region 3, you could do that. So we have a concept called follower reads, which basically is a stale but consistent read. So the data would be about 5 seconds old, but you would get a local read, and it would be fast. It would be very low latent read for yourself, but it would just be a bit stale. So that's also another option here. A lot of our customers use that, especially for metadata use cases where you want to just get a local read, even though it is stale. But yeah, just know that that's an option here.
And it's stale. It's most likely correct. I mean,
it is correct.
Probability, right? Well, actually, it is correct. That's right.
It is correct. We're always the data is always
actually you're right.
Approach. So it's really a stale but consistent read.
Yeah. So yeah. So I think there's just I think there's a lot of levers and dials and a bunch of stuff that you start thinking through, and it gets really powerful as you and people like Chris help people figure this stuff out all the time. We have a whole group of enterprise architects who live in these kind of these levers and dials and knobs and stuff. I think that's what Bram is, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's just a big lever.
He leads them all. Yeah, he's
just a big lever.
Exactly. Grand lever. Yeah. He's great. What a good dude. All right.
So final regional by row, right? Which is
yeah. So this is where a lot of our customers, take use of this concept to actually pin data close to a user, right? Or pin data because of data domiciling reasons. So this is a really simple concept. If you have a user account or profile, I can say Jim Walker, hey, he's in Chicago, so let's put him in region 2, which is in Ohio. I think that's US East 2 with AWS. But me, I'm in New York. Maybe I would be in Virginia, which is region 1, right? So you can do that. You can have that type of flexibility again, because that's going to make your application snappy, right? It's going to have Jim's data closer to him and my data closer to me because I'm closer to that data center or that availability zone or that region. So this is great for, I mentioned before, like the identity management use cases. This is great for this type of use case, right? Because then anytime someone wants to authenticate or or go through the authorization rules or privileges to get access to something, you can have these very fast reads that are localized to those users. So yeah, this is a very, probably one of our biggest differentiators in the multi-region concept, where you can take rows of data in a table and pin it in different locations. So that table could span multiple regions, but that row is going to be specific in one region where it needs to be accessed.
Right. So, again, coming back to kind of SaaS applications, Chris, you talk about this in a very, that's exactly one of these things. Look at the identity and access management of you deploying an application as a service. That's got to be fast wherever those users are, right? So let's put that data wherever those users are, typically logging in, correct? That's kind of one of the reasons you would use Cockroach. On the other side of it, well, there's usage data coming in from all over the place. And so is that spread, is that local or is that regional? I think it really depends on what you want to do with that data, right? And I think this is what I mean by different functions and different kind of workloads within the context of what you're trying to do to deploy an app as a service might have different requirements. And I think it really comes down to what you want to accomplish.
Exactly. Yeah. And some of that billing data, if we go back one slide, Jim, to the regional setup, right? So you might have a billing service, or a service that's in a primary region, but then you want to read that. Like, what was my bill? Or how much usage have I had? And I'm all the way in, region 3, which maybe is in, let's just say, Singapore.
That's right.
Because that data is kind of historical, I could just do one of those follower reads here in regional 3 and get really fast access to some stale data. Like, I don't need to go all the way back to the leaseholder that has the current information. I could just read locally from a read replica, essentially. So yeah, a lot of cool things that you can do here based on what all your services are trying to do.
Right. And ultimately, I think really what it comes down to, and I think my big realization in this type of use of Cockroach is that the database can actually provide functional value to your application. Mm-hmm. When you really start to look at some of these things, there's this weird kind of abstraction of this kind of movement of data and location of data that can actually be realized in a capability at the application layer. And I think once people get there, I think it's kind of these things. Once you see Cockroach, you can't unsee it, right? I think my first time I saw a Cockroach here in my apartment in New York City, physically, I was like, oh man. It was the same sort of thing. So yeah, sorry, I hate to go there, but it's
the same for me. When I first started playing around with the database, before I came on board, I was just shocked how easy it is to use and how resilient it is. It's just a marvelous piece of technology.
So, well, cool, Chris. I think of I always like to think of requirements. I know you and I have answered our share of RFPs and RFIs in our lives. But I think when you start to think about what is the requirement of your database as you kind of build this kind of SaaS layer, right? Because you're going to have your app running in all these different places for each whatever customer. What is that single logical database that's kind of the brain behind all of those implementations or all of those provision services? It is a different problem in itself. In fact, God, there's got to be a company to be made doing this. I mean, this is what Amazon does really well, but like, doing this for everybody, man, it's a tough job. I think about 4 requirements. Number one, if you're going to do this and you're an independent provider, it's got to run on any cloud, because your customer is going to demand it run on AWS and GCP, and they want in Azure, and wherever they want to deploy, they want to be able to deploy. I think these next 2 go back and forth with each other. And this is really kind of what you want to accomplish inside the application itself. I think both are important, but not for every requirement or every function or capability in the application. Number one, consistency data anywhere in the world, because people will use your service anywhere. And there's this thing called the speed of light, and that leads to the next one. And getting low latency access to data anywhere in the world is also going to be one of those requirements. And it's really at the table level that you make the trade-offs of those 2 things. And I think those 2 kind of go together. And then I think number 4 is actually pretty important. What we're talking about is, an operational use case. This is operational data, and operational data typically is best powered by a relational SQL database. I think that we're all kind of familiar with, and being like Postgres compatible for us is a big deal, and a choice we made very early on to make this kind of easy and kind of simple to understand. So. And I think that if you're going to think about these kind of things, there's a whole bunch of other requirements on database. I think CDC is one of those things, security, management, upgrades, like there's a whole world of RFI rows that we could think about here. But like, I think these 4 is kind of unique when we start to think about SaaS applications, and it's all pretty important. So, all right. So Chris, we talked about, in general about some of these. What's your favorite customer kind of using this for
Oh, there's
metadata?
There's so many. There's so many. I would say this is my favorite customer list here, right? So there's about 8 of them. These are like my top 8, customers or use cases. Actually, it's probably more like 10 or 12. Some of these, some of these use cases are pretty redundant. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do you want any of these?
I don't know, man. I like the 2 I always talk about Starburst and LaunchDarkly, because I think they're both like familiar with our crowd. I think some people get what Starburst does if you understand kind of the analytical side, what they're trying to do. I mean, distributed analytics. I like it because it's a data company, yet they're still using a relational database as an underlying layer to deliver something, right? Like they had this cool open source project. It used to be called Presto. Now it's Trinio, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Trinio.
Yeah. And like, well, they had to deploy as a service. Well, they needed a relational database. That one, I like LaunchDarkly too, just because I think what Justin and team are doing over there are pretty cool. But I don't know, let's talk Starburst.
Yeah, sure. I think of it for Starburst, we're a database for a database, right? That's right. This is exactly what we are.
And by the way, it's even more meta than that, because we're actually a database on a database for a database.
Yeah.
And if anybody knows what RocksDB is and PebbleDB, anyway, inside joke, I guess, but still.
So yeah, a lot of the concepts I've talked about before with, global tables, regional tables, and regional by row tables, they made use of right away. So our multi-region syntax was pretty, it's been around for, I guess, about over a year now, but they adopted it right away, even when it was a little bit rough, because it was just still pretty brand new, but they completely adopted it and gave us a lot of good tidbits on like how to make it even better. So really thankful for their work and contributions, and it's been always a pleasure working with them. But yeah, I think what they're doing is very similar to like the 4th bullet, right? Metadata for storage services. So Starburst is doing more like the federated data warehousing as far as getting access to data, and they have using Cockroach to help do that. But it's kind of similar to what we have a lot of storage companies using us for. We have a ton of storage companies that like using Cockroach for, again, a database of databases, right? Show me where when a customer connects to my service, help me locate where their data is. Do they have access to that data? What are all the identity or profile privileges that go along with it? So This is something that's, used by, we have I would say a fair amount of storage companies that utilize us. Think of it like S3 as a service, right? They do something very similar to that. And, I think the issues there with using some of the legacy databases was, one is global, right? How do you get global? How do you asynchronously replicate all this data everywhere to make sure that folks have, low latency access? That was hard for them to do. On top of that, it's like they were always trying to figure out how to create that caching layer as well to make it even faster. And a lot of times the caches couldn't keep up. And, between the high volume of transactions that are happening, it was just hard to keep the whole thing running. And there's a lot of architecture that needs to be thought about because, you might only have a single write master. How do you scale that? How do you get the data, asynchronously spread out? How do you keep the caches up to speed? With Cockroach, it kind of all goes away. Right, all that thinking kind of goes away. The database just takes care of it for you. So you can get distributed writes. You can get writes happening in any region. It doesn't have to go to a single master. Then again, now that we can push data towards the edges of the cluster, you don't need to think about caching. Right?
That's right.
That's the whole thing that goes away too. So it just makes the architecture so much more elegant for these types of use cases. And it's been great to see them, figure it out and adopt it really
Yeah,
quick.
and I think, you're going to use the right tool for the right job. It was funny, on that case about getting fast access to data as well, Chris, sometimes you need even faster than that. And so like Dan Goodman at Ultimate Tournament, they just released something called Ultimate Arcade, which is basically they've been a customer for a while. And what they've done is they said they created a game where people can actually go in there, put in $5. And if they beat somebody else in like that snake game, into the tail of the other guy, if you beat them, you take their money. Right, basically. So it's like you're betting on yourself playing a game, which is actually pretty cool. And if y'all want to go check it out, go check out Ultimate Arcade through the Ultimate Tournament, guys. It is pretty awesome. And so, for that use case, they need really fast access to data. But Ultimate Tournament is about esports betting. Think about this, like, okay, there's caching and making things available really fast, but are you going to use something like, say, Redis to do the cache, like for like in-game, like super fast betting? You know what I mean? Like, again, it comes down to kind of what you want to accomplish with what each piece of data is. For Ultimate Tournament, we're the system of record. Like there's the things that are happening in the game, but basically when you make that bet, the book, like the money that's happening, that's in Cockroach, right? Because like they need the consistency, they need the record, they need to be able to go back in time to actually understand that something happened so that regulators can come in and like sort everything out. Or somebody says like, I didn't make that bet, it's all sorted out for them, right? I mean, and I think that's kind of one of those things, again, where I think it's, I think the pattern I'm seeing is like, I think you're going to use the right database for the right piece of functionality in your application these days, right? And I think for us, there's a lot of stuff that we could do with this metadata, and I think, the use cases are pretty broad. So.
Yeah. It's funny too. I think a lot of the metadata use cases, there's not that many. The databases are actually pretty small.
Yeah.
They're very small. There's maybe only a handful of tables, but the volumes are super high, right? Because they just need all this read throughput that could be happening in the database. So kind of unique in that nature. But that's why they're kind of easy to get off the ground too, because the database doesn't need to do a lot of tricky things. In Cockroach's terms, right? If you're doing this with a legacy database, there's a lot of things you need to think about. For a Cockroach, we make it really relatively easy, and it's easy to kind of get these services off the ground.
Right. And I think one of those other things, like, again, using the right tools for the right job. I mean, everything that Chris and I are talking about, like, look, this is kind of the system of record or that metadata layer for all your SaaS applications or your instances of the SaaS application that are running. Well, what's one of the other things that you're going to want to do? You're going to run data warehousing and like analytics on that stuff. So, okay, great. Use Cockroach as that system of record. Use our native, CDC, change data capture, get that stuff into Snowflake or Redshift or BigQuery, wherever you want it. Be running analytics, understand what's going on, or use CDC to, drive that off into a Kafka sync so you can do some real-time analytics on that, make something else happen. Like, I think it's a part of the overall infrastructure of what you want to accomplish, a really important part though. And I think that's the key here is kind of thinking through those things. So,
yeah.
Well, cool, Chris. Any others that you want to talk? We have like a couple minutes. I want to give people a little time, but.
Any questions or any QA?
There was one asking about, can I set weights on node level inside a region? And I'm not sure where to go with that, Chris. Maybe it's like, I know we're doing a lot of stuff around quality of service and kind of, weights on, can you talk to that?
Weights on a node level.
I'm not sure. Maybe it's quality of service, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, you can give our primitives in multi-region. You can give preferences like where
Yeah.
you want, where you want the leaders to be, right? The leaders of these ranges, you can give kind of a preference. So that's like if we don't have to go back to those slides, but remember when we specified like a primary region, that's what we're doing. Our primitives are saying, hey, we want to give a preference to have all of the leaders of the ranges to be in that
Yeah.
preferred region, or those preferred nodes of that region.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a way of doing weights, if hopefully I'm answering the question properly, but
Yeah.
it's there.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of stuff around quality of service as well. But and I think one of the other thing is what we didn't show you here was this is all command line controls. You don't have to get deep into configurations, or we have simplified multi-region down to a couple different commands. I mean, you can do all this and you can change it in real time. You can change it all in production, right? And I think that's what's beautiful here. You don't have to bring the database down to change anything. You use a simple DML and it starts to move data around based on what you want that configuration to be. I can introduce a wholly new region and basically reconfigure things, and it's going to start moving data to where that needs to be, right, Chris? And I think that's one of those things that one of these things about Cockroach, it's kind of undervalued sometimes. Is I like to well, there's online schema changes for tables, but there's online kind of regional tables and regional settings and location settings, which is also pretty cool and important. And if anybody wants to actually learn more about this, just check out our docs and go into multi-region. There's some really good examples on exactly how to do this. You can actually use Cockroach demo. You should look up that as well. I think there's, we have an application called Mover that shows you you can simulate a multi-region application on your laptop and start to play with some of these settings and stuff. And I think it's pretty cool actually. So I always like to push people towards our docs. I would be remiss without saying nice things about the docs, right? So
docs are wonderful.
That's right. So you use Cockroach DB demo to go off and try this now, or you can spin up an instance and have a live real instance managed service. We offer two versions of Cockroach DB. There's dedicated, which is a full featured single tenant instance. This is where people run production applications. Last October, we released something called Cockroach DB serverless. It's still in beta. It's a single region application, or it's a single region instance. We'll make it multi-region over the course of, I'm not going to give a date. Somebody might shoot me. Some engineer might, what are you talking about? But we'll get multi-region going on in serverless relatively soon as well. What's cool about serverless, it's free. It's free up to 5 gigabytes of storage, 250 million request units, which is basically an abstraction for number of queries. There's a little bit more information on the website around that, but you can use it for free. I like to think of it as just a Postgres database. That's free, and I can do. Remember, I was talking about these no-code apps. I would just run them all against serverless, totally free. And I had clusters up in seconds. So all that's there if you want to go check it out. Dedicated is definitely the preferred way in which people consume. So, but if you can go out and try this right now, our SRE team makes sure that your instance is up and running. I think we just changed our SLA. I think we have 4 nines guaranteed uptime now. It's just pretty powerful stuff. So, so Chris, do you want to take on any last questions we have here?
Yeah, there was just a question that came out in the chat from QDSF. So is it possible to automatically move users' data between regions? And absolutely you can. So there's a couple different ways that you can do this. If you're using those regional by row tables where the data is pinned to a particular location, we call that homing, right? You're homing that piece of data. And usually there's a regional column that you would have with that data to say, all right, Jim is in Chicago, Chris is in New York. Let's say Chris moves to Chicago. So all I have to do is update my region to be Chicago, and all of a sudden Chris's data is going to start moving into Chicago. So pretty easy to do. I mean, that's just a regular update statement where you're just updating the user's region.
You're updating the row and it moves it, and that's right. And I think eventually, in serverless, we'll automatically start to assign things to locations and regions and move things around using kind of AI, and there's a bunch of stuff that we're doing on that side. So I don't know. QDSF it seems like a shortcut to maybe it's a competitor asking the question. I don't know, Chris. But I think it's a great question for us. So
always good to share knowledge, though.
I always use ASD or LKJ is me, Linton Kwesi Johnson. That's me. So anyway. All right. Well, listen, Chris, thank you for doing this today. Super.
Sorry about all the hiccups on my end with internet and screaming kids and stuff, but hopefully
it makes it resilient. It makes it real. Everybody's resilient here. So I want to thank everybody for taking their time today. We went a little longer than I thought we were only going to half hour, Chris. This is great. So I hope it was valuable to everybody. I think a lot of people stayed on. So we had a fair amount of people across YouTube, LinkedIn, and elsewhere. So thank you all for joining. Again, a version of this will be up on our YouTube channel. You can go create a Cockroach DB instance right now. Please go do it. Go check out a serverless cluster, spin up something, use the Postgres drivers, and just build a little something. We would love it, right? So, so on behalf of Chris and I, thank you, buddy. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. See ya.